The gunshot split the afternoon air like thunder, and Hannah Reynolds threw herself against the rough wooden floor of the stagecoach as splinters exploded from the doorframe beside her head. Outside, men were shouting in Spanish and English, their voices rough with excitement and malice as they circled the coach like wolves around wounded prey. The driver had already fallen silent, his body slumped somewhere above her, and the guard's rifle had clattered uselessly to the ground moments before. Hannah pressed her cheek against the dusty floorboards, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst through her chest. This was supposed to be a simple journey from Fort Smith to Tahlequah in the Cherokee Nation, Indian Territory, where she would take up her position as a schoolteacher. Instead, it was turning into her final moments on Earth. "Come out, lady," one of the bandits called, his accent thick and mocking. "We just want to talk, yes. Maybe you have something pretty for us." Hannah squeezed her eyes shut and tried to make herself smaller, wishing she could disappear into the floorboards entirely. Her carpet bag lay beside her, containing everything she owned in the world: 2 dresses, some undergarments, her mother's Bible, and the letter confirming her teaching position. Not much to show for 22 years of life, but it was hers, and she would not surrender it easily. "Break the door," another voice commanded, harder and colder than the first. "We are wasting time." The door handle rattled violently, then the entire coach shook as someone tried to force it open. Hannah scrambled backward, pressing herself against the opposite side, searching desperately for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers found nothing but smooth wood and empty air. Then came a different sound, one that made the bandits curse and shout warnings to each other. Hoofbeats, rapid and purposeful, accompanied by the distinctive crack of rifle fire. Hannah risked lifting her head just enough to peer through the shattered window. Through the dust and smoke, she glimpsed a figure on horseback, moving with such fluid precision that horse and rider seemed to be one creature. The man wore a dark hat pulled low, a dusty brown coat, and sat his saddle as though he had been born there. Another shot rang out and one of the bandits fell. The others scattered, returning fire wildly, but the rider kept coming, his rifle speaking again and again with deadly accuracy. Hannah watched, frozen between terror and strange fascination, as this lone cowboy took on 5 armed men without hesitation. "Ride out," the bandit leader screamed. "Ride out now." The remaining outlaws threw themselves onto their horses and fled in different directions, leaving their dead companions sprawling in the dust beside the stagecoach. The mysterious rider circled once more, his rifle trained on the retreating figures, then finally lowered his weapon and turned toward the coach. Hannah found herself unable to move as he dismounted and approached. Through the broken window, she could now see him clearly. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh sun, though he could not have been much older than 30. His jaw was strong and shadowed with several days' stubble, and his eyes, a striking pale blue, swept over the scene with practiced assessment before settling on her hiding place. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice carrying a soft drawl that marked him as someone who had spent considerable time in the South. "You can come out now. They are gone." Hannah tried to respond, but her throat had closed up entirely. She remained frozen, staring at him through the window like a startled rabbit. The cowboy's expression softened slightly. He holstered his rifle on his saddle and raised both hands in a peaceful gesture. "I am not going to hurt you, madam. My name is Jack Morrison. I heard the shooting from the ridge and came as quickly as I could." "Are you injured?" Slowly, carefully, Hannah shook her head. Her limbs felt like water as she finally forced herself to move, crawling toward the door on trembling hands and knees. The cowboy opened it from the outside and stepped back to give her space. When she emerged into the afternoon sunlight, her legs nearly gave out entirely, and Jack Morrison caught her elbow to steady her. "Easy now," he murmured. "Take your time. The shock will pass." Hannah gulped air, trying to force her racing heart to slow. Now that she was standing, she could see the full aftermath of the attack. The driver lay motionless in his seat, blood staining his shirt. The guard had fallen to the ground on the other side of the coach. Both men were clearly beyond help, and Hannah felt bile rise in her throat. "Do not look at them," Jack said firmly, turning her away from the bodies. "Look at me instead. What is your name, Hannah?" she managed to whisper. "Hannah Reynolds." "Well, Miss Reynolds, you have had a terrible experience, but you are safe now. Can you tell me where you were heading?" "Tahlequah," Hannah said, her voice growing slightly stronger. "I am meant to teach at the school there. I left Fort Smith this morning, and we were supposed to arrive before nightfall." Jack glanced up at the sun, gauging its position. "You are about 15 miles out, too far to walk before dark, and I cannot leave you here." He looked at the stagecoach, then at the dead horses in their traces, shot down by the bandits in the initial attack. His jaw tightened. "Your driver and guard deserve proper burial, but I need to get you somewhere safe first. Those outlaws might come back with reinforcements once they realize only one man drove them off." Hannah nodded numbly, not trusting herself to speak. Everything felt unreal, as though she were watching events unfold from a great distance. "My horse can carry two for a while," Jack continued, making decisions with the calm authority of someone accustomed to crisis. "There is a trading post about 5 miles east. We can send word from there and arrange for someone to come back for the dead. Can you ride?" "I have ridden before," Hannah said, though it had been years since she had sat on anything more spirited than an old plow horse on her uncle's farm in Missouri. Jack retrieved her carpet bag from the coach and secured it behind his saddle, then helped her mount. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, shifted slightly under the additional weight but did not protest. Jack swung up behind her with easy grace, settling into the saddle and reaching around her to take the reins. Hannah found herself pressed against his chest, acutely aware of his warmth and the solid strength of his arms on either side of her. "Hold on," he said simply, and urged the horse into a smooth trot. They rode in silence for the first mile, Hannah too overwhelmed to make conversation, and Jack apparently content to focus on navigating the rough trail. The landscape around them was beautiful in a stark way, rolling hills covered in tall grass that rippled like water in the breeze, dotted here and there with stands of oak and hickory. In the distance, blue mountains rose against the horizon. Under different circumstances, Hannah might have found it breathtaking. Now it simply felt vast and empty, a reminder of how far she was from everything familiar. "You came from Missouri originally?" Jack asked eventually, breaking the silence. Hannah started slightly, surprised he had guessed. "Yes, a small town outside of Independence. How did you know?" "Your accent," he said. "Faint, but it is there. I spent some time around Independence myself, years back." "And where are you from originally?" "Virginia. But that was a long time ago." Something in his tone suggested this was not a subject he wished to pursue, so Hannah let it drop. "Thank you," she said instead, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "For what you did back there. You saved my life." "Those men should not have been that close to the main trail," Jack replied, anger touching his voice. "The tribal police usually keep the roads clear. You were unlucky. Or lucky that you happened to be nearby." She felt rather than saw his slight shrug. "I was riding back from a job when I heard the shots. Anyone decent would have done the same." Hannah was not entirely certain that was true, but she did not argue. They lapsed into silence again until the trading post came into view. A rough structure built of logs and clay with a covered porch and a hand-painted sign that read, "McCready's." Several horses stood tied out front, and smoke rose from a chimney. Jack dismounted first and helped Hannah down, his hands firm and respectful on her waist. Her legs had steadied somewhat during the ride, though she still felt shaky. Inside, the trading post was dim and crowded with goods, barrels and crates stacked against every wall. 3 men sat at a rough table playing cards, and a 4th stood behind a counter, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard. All 4 looked up as Jack and Hannah entered. "Jack Morrison," the man behind the counter said, surprised recognition in his voice. "What brings you here? And who is this?" "Stage was attacked about 5 miles west, Tom," Jack said without preamble. "Driver and guard dead, horses too. This is Miss Reynolds. She was a passenger." The card players stood immediately, their game forgotten. Tom McCready came around the counter, his weathered face grave. "Those bandits again, 5 of them," Jack confirmed. "Mexican and white. I got one and the others scattered, but they might regroup." "We will ride out and bring the bodies in," one of the card players said, a young Cherokee man with close cropped hair. "Sam can ride to the tribal police and report it." "I appreciate it," Jack said. He turned to Hannah. "Miss Reynolds, Tom here runs an honest establishment. His wife makes the best coffee in the territory. You are safe here while we sort things out." Hannah nodded, still feeling dazed. Tom gestured toward a door at the back. "Sarah," he called, "we have a lady here needs some comfort." A woman appeared, small and brisk with graying dark hair and kind eyes. She took one look at Hannah and immediately put an arm around her shoulders. "Come with me, dear. You look about ready to fall over." Hannah allowed herself to be led into the back room, which turned out to be the McCready family's living quarters. Sarah sat her down in a rocking chair and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands, sweetened with molasses. The warmth and sweetness helped, and Hannah felt some of the shock beginning to recede. "Those damned bandits," Sarah muttered, settling into another chair with her own coffee. "Pardon my language, but they have been terrorizing travelers for months now. The tribal police cannot seem to catch them. They hit and run, then disappear into the hills." "The man who saved me," Hannah said hesitantly. "Jack Morrison." "Who is he?" Sarah's expression softened. "Jack is a good man, though he keeps to himself mostly. He does odd jobs around the territory, ranch work mostly, breaking horses, cattle drives, that sort of thing. He has a small place a few miles south of here, nothing fancy, but he built it himself. Been here about 3 years now, ever since he mustered out of the army. He was a soldier. Cavalry, from what I understand. Fought in the war between the states, though he does not talk about it much. Most men who lived through that horror prefer not to." Sarah sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "He is honest and capable, which is about the highest praise you can give a man out here. If Jack Morrison decides to help you, you can count on him seeing it through." They sat in companionable silence for a while, and gradually Hannah felt her nerves settling. Through the thin walls, she could hear the men organizing themselves, discussing routes and timing. Eventually, Tom came to the door. "The boys are riding out now," he told Sarah. "Jack is staying here until we know what is happening with Miss Reynolds's travel plans. She can rest here as long as needed," Sarah said firmly. "That poor thing has been through enough for one day." Hannah wanted to protest that she was not helpless, but honesty compelled her to admit she was deeply grateful for the kindness. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but the memory of crouching on that stagecoach floor, certain she was about to die, remained vivid and terrible. Jack appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Miss Reynolds, I sent word ahead to Tahlequah about the attack. Someone from the school should receive the message by tomorrow. In the meantime, Tom and Sarah have offered you a bed for the night. I will stay nearby in case those bandits come back, though I doubt they will." "Where will you stay?" Hannah asked. "I have my bedroll. I will make camp outside." "Nonsense," Sarah said briskly. "You will sleep in the store, Jack Morrison. It is going to rain tonight. I can feel it in my bones." "You have done more than enough already without catching your death of cold." Jack looked as though he might argue, but Tom nodded in agreement. "Sarah is right. Besides, I would feel better knowing you are close. Those outlaws were bold to attack so near the trading post." "All right," Jack agreed quietly. "Thank you." He withdrew, and Sarah turned to Hannah with a maternal smile. "Now then, let's get you cleaned up properly. You have dust in your hair and your dress is torn. I might have something that will fit you until your own things can be laundered." The next few hours passed in a blur of mundane domestic activities that helped ground Hannah back in reality. Sarah found her a dress that was only slightly too large, fed her a simple but hearty dinner of venison stew and cornbread, and made up a comfortable pallet near the fire. Tom and Jack ate with them but spoke little, both men seeming preoccupied with their own thoughts. As darkness fell and rain began pattering against the roof, just as Sarah had predicted, Hannah found herself studying Jack Morrison across the firelight. He sat with his back against the wall, cleaning his rifle with practiced, economical movements. There was something deeply competent about him, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with bravado. He had killed a man that afternoon to save her life, yet he showed no signs of disturbance about it, no need to boast or explain. He had simply done what needed doing and moved on. As if sensing her gaze, Jack looked up. Their eyes met across the room, and Hannah felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She looked away quickly, embarrassed to have been caught staring. "You should rest, Miss Reynolds," Sarah said gently. "Tomorrow will be easier than today, I promise you." Hannah lay down on the pallet and pulled the blanket up to her chin, listening to the rain and the low murmur of voices as the others talked quietly. Despite everything that had happened, she felt safe here. And although she barely knew Jack Morrison, she had the strange but certain sense that, as long as he was near, no harm would come to her. She woke once in the deep night to find the fire burned down to coals and everyone else asleep. Jack had made his bed near the door, positioned so he would hear anyone approaching. Even in sleep, he seemed alert, ready. Hannah watched his silhouette for a moment, this stranger who had ridden out of nowhere and changed everything, then closed her eyes and drifted back into dreams. Morning brought clearer skies and the return of the men who had gone to retrieve the bodies. They had brought the stagecoach as well, and Tom set about arranging for the driver and guard to be transported to Tahlequah for proper burial. Hannah stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl Sarah had lent her, watching the grim proceedings. Jack approached, leading his horse. "A wagon is coming from Tahlequah this afternoon to collect you," he said. "You should be able to reach the town before dark." "I see," Hannah said, surprised by the disappointment she felt. "Then you will be leaving?" "I have work waiting," Jack said, but he hesitated, studying her face. "Unless you would prefer I ride along." "The wagon driver is reliable, but after yesterday, I would understand if you wanted someone you know nearby." "I barely know you," Hannah pointed out, but she was smiling slightly despite herself. "True enough," Jack admitted. "But sometimes a day like yesterday counts for more than weeks of ordinary acquaintance." Hannah considered this and found it impossible to argue with. In those terrifying moments when the bandits had surrounded the stagecoach, and then in the strange intimacy of riding pressed against Jack's chest while his arms encircled her, something had formed between them. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but the foundation for it. Trust, perhaps. a sense of connection forged in crisis. "I would appreciate your company," she said honestly, "if it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Jack replied, and something in his eyes suggested he was pleased by her answer. The wagon arrived mid-afternoon, driven by an older Cherokee man named David Adair, who introduced himself as a deacon at the Baptist church in Tahlequah. He was kind and grandfatherly, clucking sympathetically over Hannah's ordeal and assuring her that such violence was rare on the roads, that she had simply been terribly unlucky. Jack tied his horse to the back of the wagon and climbed up to sit beside Hannah in the bed, where Tom had arranged blankets and supplies to make the journey more comfortable. As they rolled eastward, Hannah found herself relaxing for the first time since the attack. The countryside was beautiful in the fresh, washed light after the rain, everything green and vibrant. David pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the Cherokee Nation, explaining how the tribal government worked and what life was like in Tahlequah, which served as the capital. Jack contributed little to the conversation but listened attentively, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. Once, when the wagon jolted over a particularly rough patch, Hannah was thrown sideways and he caught her automatically, his hand steadying her shoulder. The touch lasted only a moment, but Hannah felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "You said you are here to teach," Jack said during a quiet moment. "What made you choose Indian Territory?" "The need," Hannah replied simply. "I saw an advertisement seeking teachers willing to come west. The pay is modest, but room and board are provided, and the work matters. Education matters. These children deserve the same opportunities as any others." "That is an admirable view," Jack said. "Not everyone would see it that way." "Then not everyone is worth listening to," Hannah said firmly, and was rewarded with a rare smile from Jack, brief but genuine. They reached Tahlequah as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The town was larger than Hannah had expected, with several substantial buildings including a courthouse, stores, churches, and rows of neat houses. David drove directly to a large two-story structure that he identified as the female seminary, where Hannah would be teaching and living. A woman emerged to meet them, tall and dignified with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. "You must be Miss Reynolds," she said, her voice carrying the precise diction of the highly educated. "I am Mrs. Wadey, the principal. We received word of the terrible attack." "I am deeply relieved you arrived safely." Hannah climbed down from the wagon with Jack's assistance, her legs stiff from the journey. "Thank you, Mrs. Wadey. I am grateful to be here, though I wish the circumstances had been different." Mrs. Wadey's sharp eyes moved to Jack, assessing him quickly. "And you are?" "Jack Morrison, madam. I happened to be nearby when the attack occurred." "Then we owe you a great debt, Mr. Morrison. Miss Reynolds's predecessor left us quite unexpectedly, and we have been in desperate need of another teacher. Had we lost Miss Reynolds as well, it would have been catastrophic for our students." "I am glad I could help," Jack said simply. Mrs. Wadey gestured toward the seminary. "Please, Miss Reynolds, come inside. I will show you to your quarters and introduce you to the other teachers." "Mr. Morrison, David, will you join us for supper? It is the least we can offer after your service." David accepted immediately, but Jack hesitated. Hannah found herself holding her breath, hoping he would agree, not wanting to say goodbye yet. "That is very kind," Jack said finally. "I would be honored." The seminary's dining hall was a pleasant room with long tables where the resident teachers took their meals. Besides Mrs. Wadey, there were 3 other women. Miss Ella Thornton, who taught the youngest students, Mrs. Grace Pritchard, a widow who taught domestic arts, and Miss Catherine Wells, who handled the older girls. All were friendly and welcoming, though Hannah sensed they were sizing her up as much as greeting her. The meal was simple but well prepared, and the conversation flowed easily. Hannah answered questions about her background and training, conscious of Jack sitting quietly at the end of the table, saying little but observing everything. When Mrs. Wadey asked about the attack, Hannah kept her account brief, not wanting to relive the terror in detail. "You were fortunate that Mr. Morrison was nearby," Mrs. Wadey said, looking at Jack with renewed interest. "Are you familiar with this area?" "I have a small place south of here," Jack explained. "I do ranch work mostly, odd jobs where they are needed. I was returning from delivering some horses to a buyer near Fort Smith when I heard the gunfire." "Perhaps you would be interested in some work here," Mrs. Wadey suggested. "We have been needing someone to repair the fence around the property and do some maintenance on the outbuildings. The pay is modest but honest." Jack considered this. How long would the work take? 2 weeks, perhaps 3 depending on how extensive the repairs prove to be. We can provide meals and a place to sleep in the barn. Hannah felt her heart lift unreasonably at the thought of Jack remaining nearby, though she told herself firmly that it made no practical difference. She had come here to teach, not to develop romantic notions about cowboys who happened to rescue her. "I can spare 3 weeks," Jack said. "My own place can wait that long. When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow, if you are willing. David can show you the barn and the areas that need attention." So it was settled. After supper, David took Jack off to inspect the facilities while Mrs. Wadey gave Hannah a tour of the seminary. Her room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a desk, a chair, and a wardrobe. A window looked out over the grounds, offering a view of the barn and paddock where Jack would apparently be working. "Classes begin at 8 o'clock, Mrs. Wadey explained. "You will have the intermediate students, ages 10 to 14. They are good girls, eager to learn, though some struggle with English as it is not their first language. Patience and consistency are key. I will observe your first few lessons to ensure you are settling in properly." "Of course," Hannah said. "I appreciate your guidance." Mrs. Wadey's stern expression softened slightly. "You have had a terrible introduction to Indian Territory, Miss Reynolds, but please do not let it color your entire perception. This is a good place with good people. The seminary is important work, preparing these young women for whatever future they choose. I hope you will come to love it as I do." "I am sure I will," Hannah said, and found she meant it. Despite everything, there was something appealing about Tahlequah, a sense of purpose and community that she had not found in Missouri. That night, lying in her new bed in the darkness, Hannah replayed the events of the past day and a half. It seemed impossible that so much had changed so quickly. She had left Fort Smith as a nervous but optimistic young teacher, had faced death, had been rescued by a stranger who was becoming something more than a stranger, and had arrived at her destination transformed by the experience. Through her window, she could see a light burning in the barn. Jack would be settling in, making his temporary quarters comfortable. Hannah wondered what he was thinking, whether he ever felt lonely in his solitary life drifting from job to job. Then she firmly told herself to stop wondering such things and go to sleep. She had students to meet in the morning, a whole new life to begin. But as she drifted off, her last conscious thought was of pale blue eyes and strong, steady hands, and the way Jack Morrison had made her feel safe when her world was falling apart. The next few days established a routine. Hannah threw herself into teaching with determination, grateful for the distraction from dwelling on the stagecoach attack. Her students were indeed eager to learn, bright-eyed girls who asked endless questions and absorbed knowledge like flowers soaking up rain. Many came from prominent Cherokee families, daughters of tribal officials and successful merchants, sent to the seminary for education that blended traditional Cherokee values with academic subjects like mathematics, literature, and geography. Hannah discovered that she loved teaching more than she had anticipated. There was something deeply satisfying about watching understanding dawn on a young face, about shaping minds and encouraging curiosity. Mrs. Wadey observed her first several lessons and pronounced herself satisfied, leaving Hannah to develop her own teaching style. But despite her best efforts to focus entirely on her work, Hannah found her attention wandering to the view from her window at odd moments. Jack was frequently visible, working on the fence that surrounded the seminary grounds, his coat discarded and his shirt sleeves rolled up against the warm October sun. He moved with the same efficient grace she had noticed before, wasting no motion, working steadily without apparent effort. Sometimes the girls noticed her distraction and giggled behind their hands, whispering to each other in Cherokee. Hannah tried to maintain her dignity and redirect their attention to their lessons, but she suspected she was not entirely successful. On the third day, during the lunch period when the students were at their meal, Hannah took a cup of water out to where Jack was working. He had just finished resetting a fence post and straightening to wipe sweat from his forehead when she approached. "I thought you might be thirsty," she said, offering the cup. "That is thoughtful of you," Jack replied, accepting it gratefully. He drank deeply, then handed it back. "How are you settling in? The teaching suits you." "I think so," Hannah said. "The girls are wonderful. Challenging in the best way." "I saw you through the window this morning," Jack admitted. "You looked like you were in your element, completely absorbed. It was good to see." The idea that he had been watching her made Hannah's cheeks warm. "Have you been comfortable in the barn?" "I know it is not luxurious. I have slept in far worse places," Jack assured her. "The barn is dry and clean, and Mrs. Pritchard sends enough food to feed 3 men. I have no complaints." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Hannah found herself reluctant to return to the seminary building. "Jack," she said impulsively, "would you walk with me on Sunday, after church services? Mrs. Wadey mentioned there is a nice path along the creek." Jack's expression was difficult to read, but something flickered in his eyes. "Are you certain that would be appropriate? I would not want to damage your reputation." "We would be in full view of half the town," Hannah pointed out, "and you saved my life. I think that earns you the right to take a walk with me if we both choose it." A slow smile spread across Jack's face, transforming it entirely. "Then yes, Miss Reynolds, I would be honored to walk with you on Sunday." Hannah returned to the seminary feeling inexplicably lighter, as though the sun shone brighter than it had moments before. She caught Miss Thornton watching her with knowing amusement but did not care. Whatever was developing between her and Jack Morrison, she wanted to explore it, to see where it might lead. Sunday arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool and clear with leaves beginning to turn gold and crimson on the trees. The Baptist church service was well attended, the congregation a mix of Cherokee families and white settlers, with the sermon delivered in both English and Cherokee. Hannah spotted Jack sitting near the back, his hat in his hands, listening attentively. Afterward, as promised, they walked together along the creek path, staying within sight of the town but far enough away for private conversation. The creek burbled over smooth stones and birds called from the trees overhead. "Tell me about Virginia," Hannah said. "You mentioned you were from there originally." Jack was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah worried she had overstepped. Then he began to speak, his voice measured and careful. "I grew up on a small farm in the Shenandoah Valley. Beautiful country, green and fertile. My father raised horses, and I learned to ride almost before I could walk. When the war started, I was 17, old enough to think I knew everything, young enough to believe war was glorious. His jaw tightened. I joined the Confederate cavalry, fought for 4 years. By the time it ended, I was 21 and the farm was gone, burned during one of the Valley campaigns. My parents had died of fever. There was nothing to go back to. I am so sorry, Hannah said softly. Jack shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. A lot of men lost everything in that war on both sides. I was not special. I drifted for a while, doing whatever work I could find, trying to figure out who I was now that the world I knew was gone. Eventually, I joined the Army again, the Union Army this time, because I needed the pay and they were not particular about asking too many questions of men who could ride and shoot. That must have been difficult, Hannah said, fighting for the opposite side. The war was over, Jack said flatly. It did not matter which side you had fought for anymore, only that you were willing to work. I spent 3 years in the cavalry, mostly patrolling the territories, dealing with outlaws and keeping the peace as best we could. When my enlistment ended, I mustered out, came here because I had heard the land was good and people left you alone. I found a nice piece of property, built a cabin, and I have been here since. You like it? Living alone, I mean. Jack considered the question seriously. I've gotten used to it. After the war, after all that death and chaos, the solitude felt healing. I could work with my hands, build something instead of destroying it. I was content, or at least I thought I was. And now? Hannah asked, her heart beating faster. Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. Now I am not so certain. This past week, working here at the seminary, seeing you with your students, talking with you like this, it has reminded me that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. I thought I wanted to be alone, but maybe I was just afraid to risk caring about anything again. Hannah felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them, standing by the creek under the autumn sky. I understand that fear, she said quietly. After my parents died when I was 16, I lived with my uncle's family. They were kind but distant, and I always felt like an obligation rather than a welcome addition. I learned to be self-sufficient, to not need anyone. Coming here was supposed to be about the work, about making a difference. I was not looking for anything else. But, Jack prompted, but then you rode out of nowhere and saved my life, and suddenly everything feels different. Possibilities I had not considered are opening up. It is terrifying and exciting all at once. Jack reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she chose, and took her hand. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm and strong against hers. I am not good with words, he said. I have spent too many years alone, keeping everything inside, but I would like to keep seeing you, Hannah. If you are willing, I do not know where it might lead, but I would like to find out. So would I, Hannah whispered. They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the creek singing beside them. Then Jack slowly raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it made Hannah's breath catch. We should head back, he said reluctantly. People will talk if we are gone too long. Let them talk, Hannah said, but she allowed him to lead her back toward town, her hand still in his. Over the following weeks, Hannah and Jack saw each other daily as he continued his work on the seminary grounds. They fell into the habit of eating lunch together when weather permitted, sitting on the steps of the barn while Hannah's students had their midday meal. They talked about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had been, dreams they harbored. Jack spoke more than Hannah suspected he had in years, opening up gradually like a flower unfurling in sunlight. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor, often catching her by surprise with wry observations that made her laugh. She discovered that he was widely read despite limited formal education, having spent countless evening hours with borrowed books. He admitted to loving poetry, particularly Walt Whitman, though he said it self-consciously as though expecting her to mock him. Instead, she recited her favorite passage from Song of Myself, and they spent an hour discussing Whitman's vision of America. For his part, Jack seemed endlessly interested in Hannah's teaching, asking about her students and listening intently as she described their progress and challenges. He helped her carry supplies, repaired a broken desk in her classroom, and once carved a beautiful wooden pointer for her to use during geography lessons. The other teachers noticed, of course. Miss Thornton teased Hannah gently about her handsome cowboy, while Mrs. Pritchard offered unsolicited advice about courtship that made Hannah blush. Even Mrs. Wadey, stern and proper, seemed quietly approving. "Mr. Morrison is a good man," she told Hannah one afternoon. "Reliable and honest. Those qualities are rarer than they should be, particularly in unsettled country like this. If you have affection for him, I see no reason not to pursue it, provided you maintain appropriate propriety." As Jack's work at the seminary drew toward completion, both he and Hannah became aware that a decision point was approaching. He had mentioned his cabin several times, describing the valley where it sat, the way the morning light came through the trees, the satisfaction of working his own land. It sounded idyllic, and Hannah found herself imagining it in detail, picturing Jack there alone. One evening, as November arrived and brought with it sharper cold, Jack asked Hannah to walk with him after supper. They bundled in coats and scarves and wandered toward the edge of town, where houses gave way to open country. "I finish the repairs tomorrow," Jack said without preamble. "Mrs. Wadey is satisfied with the work, and there is nothing left that needs doing." Hannah's heart sank, though she had known this was coming. "I see, and then you will return to your cabin." "That was the plan," Jack agreed. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the gathering dusk. "But I find myself reluctant to go. Or rather, reluctant to go alone." Hope fluttered in Hannah's chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying this badly," Jack muttered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Hannah, these past weeks with you have been the best I have known in years, maybe ever. I wake up looking forward to seeing you. I go to sleep thinking about our conversations. When I am working, I find myself watching for you, and when you appear, everything gets brighter." "Jack," Hannah breathed, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know it is fast," he continued. "I know we have not known each other long. But I am 31 years old, and I have learned that life is short and unpredictable. You could have died in that stagecoach attack. I could have been killed in the war, or during any of a dozen dangerous situations since. We do not get guarantees about time. All we get is choices about how to use whatever time we have." He took both her hands in his, holding them gently. "I am choosing to tell you that I have fallen in love with you, Hannah Reynolds, completely and absolutely. And I am hoping, praying that you might feel the same way." Tears stung Hannah's eyes. "I do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, Jack. I think I started falling that first day when you rode in like something out of a story and saved my life. And then every day since has only made me more certain." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. Hannah could hear his heart beating, strong and steady, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling safer and more complete than she ever had before. "I do not want to go back to that cabin alone," Jack murmured into her hair. "I want to take you with me as my wife. I know I do not have much to offer. The cabin is small, the work is hard, and there will be lean times. But I swear to you, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Hannah pulled back enough to look up at his face. When what? When would we marry? I have obligations here, students who depend on me. I cannot simply abandon them." "I would never ask you to," Jack said quickly. "You love teaching. I have seen how much it means to you, so here is what I am thinking. We marry soon, before winter sets in properly. You continue teaching through the end of the term in May. I will find work nearby so I can be close. Then, in the summer, we go to the cabin together. Maybe you could teach there too if there are families in the area who want education for their children. Or maybe you teach at a school in whatever town is closest. We will figure it out together." It was a good plan, one that honored both Hannah's commitments and their desire to build a life together. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Jack's face lit with such joy that Hannah felt her heart might burst. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, a promise and a beginning all at once. Hannah kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and certainty into it, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless and laughing. They married 3 weeks later in the Baptist church, with half of Tahlequah in attendance. Hannah wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Pritchard had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Jack had picked that morning. Jack wore his best shirt and pants, freshly laundered and pressed, looking both nervous and proud as he waited at the altar. David Adair officiated, his grandfatherly voice warm as he spoke about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Hannah barely heard the words, too focused on Jack's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When David pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed her sweetly while the congregation applauded. Then they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, officially beginning their life together. The celebration afterward was simple but joyous, with food and music and dancing. Hannah danced with Jack, with David, with Tom McCready, who had ridden in from his trading post for the occasion. Jack, who had initially claimed he did not dance, proved surprisingly adept once coaxed onto the floor, spinning Hannah around until she was dizzy with laughter. As evening fell, they said their goodbyes and made their way to a small house on the edge of town that Jack had rented for the winter months. It was modest but comfortable, with a fireplace and a real bed, and a sense of privacy that made Hannah suddenly shy. Jack seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hand and led her to sit by the fire, then disappeared into the small kitchen area. He returned with 2 cups of tea and settled beside her, close but not crowding. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I can remember being," Hannah said honestly. "Though I confess I am a bit nervous too." "So am I," Jack admitted. "I want to be a good husband to you, Hannah. I want to make you happy every day." "You already do," Hannah said. She set down her tea and turned to face him. "Jack Morrison, I love you. I trust you completely. Whatever happens from here, we face it together." Jack kissed her then, deeper than before, and Hannah responded with growing confidence. They stayed by the fire for a long while, learning each other through touch and whispered words, until finally Jack picked her up and carried her to the bed, where they began their married life in earnest. The winter months passed in a blur of work and quiet happiness. Hannah continued teaching while Jack found employment at a large ranch outside town, breaking horses and managing cattle. They fell into domestic routines, cooking meals together, reading by the fire in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Jack proved to be a thoughtful husband, considerate and affectionate. He left little notes for Hannah to find, brought her wildflowers even in winter, listened attentively to her stories about her students. Hannah, for her part, discovered the joy of caring for someone again, of having a partner to share the daily triumphs and frustrations of life. In January, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She told Jack on a snowy evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down as though she might break. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Hannah, that is the best news I have ever heard. You are happy about it?" Hannah asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jack said fervently. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A whole new person made from our love. I cannot think of anything more miraculous," they told Mrs. Wadey the next day, and she immediately began making arrangements to find another teacher to take over Hannah's classes after the term ended. "You will have your hands full with the baby," she said practically, "though we will miss you terribly. You have been an excellent addition to our faculty." As winter gave way to spring and Hannah's pregnancy became visible, they began making plans for the move to Jack's cabin. He rode out there in March to make improvements, adding a second room specifically for the baby and reinforcing the roof. He returned full of descriptions and sketches, excited to show Hannah everything once the term ended. Hannah's last day of teaching in mid-May was bittersweet. Her students, now aware of her condition, had made her gifts: drawings, pressed flowers, a small blanket that one girl's mother had helped her weave. Hannah cried openly as she said goodbye, promising to write and visit when she could. "You have made a real difference here, Mrs. Wadey told her during a private farewell. "These girls will remember you, will carry forward what you taught them. That legacy matters." 2 days later, Jack loaded their possessions into a wagon borrowed from the ranch and they set out for his cabin, 30 miles south of Tahlequah. Hannah sat beside him on the bench seat, her hand resting on her growing belly, watching the landscape unfold. The cabin sat in a green valley with a creek running nearby and mountains rising in the distance. It was small but sturdy, built from logs Jack had cut and shaped himself. Wildflowers dotted the meadow and a vegetable garden was already flourishing, tended by Jack during his visits. "What do you think?" Jack asked anxiously as he helped Hannah down from the wagon. "It is beautiful," Hannah said honestly. "It feels like home already." They spent the next weeks settling in, arranging their few pieces of furniture, hanging curtains Hannah had sewn, making the cabin truly theirs. Jack worked the land, planting additional crops and improving the fencing to keep out deer. Hannah kept house and sewed baby clothes, preparing for the arrival of their child. In the evenings, they sat on the porch Jack had built, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about the future. Jack dreamed of expanding the cabin further, maybe raising horses like his father had. Hannah hoped to establish a small school in the area, teaching any children whose families wanted education. They made plans and shared hopes, building their life together piece by piece. Their son was born in late August during a thunderstorm, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Jack, who had ridden frantically to fetch the nearest midwife when Hannah's labor started, paced outside until the woman finally emerged and told him he had a healthy boy. He rushed in to find Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets her students had made. "Jack," she said softly, "meet your son." Jack approached slowly as though afraid he might shatter the moment. He looked down at the small red face, the tiny fists waving, the dark hair plastered to the baby's skull, and felt something crack open in his chest. Love, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "He is perfect," Jack whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him James, after Jack's father, and he proved to be a healthy, happy baby who brought new dimension to their lives. Jack took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, changing diapers and walking the floor with James when he fussed, singing old songs in his surprisingly pleasant voice. Hannah recovered well from the birth, and by October, she was back to her normal routines, though now they revolved around the baby's needs. She found she loved motherhood even more than she had anticipated, treasuring each small milestone. James's first smile, his delighted laughter when Jack played peek-a-boo, the way he gripped her finger with his tiny hand. As winter approached again, Jack made another trip to Tahlequah to purchase supplies and check on potential work for the spring. He returned with unexpected news. "I ran into Tom McCready," he told Hannah over dinner that night. "He says there are 3 families within 10 miles of here with school-age children. They have been talking about hiring a teacher but had not found anyone willing to come this far out. I mentioned you might be interested." Hannah's eyes lit up. "Really? That would be wonderful. I have missed teaching. The families want to meet you first, obviously, and we would need to figure out where to hold classes, probably rotating between houses until something more permanent could be arranged. But if you are serious about it, I think it could work." Over the following months, Hannah did indeed establish a small school, teaching 5 children ranging from 6 to 12 years old in a rotation between 3 family homes. It was different from the structured environment of the seminary, more intimate and flexible, but deeply rewarding. The families were grateful, the children eager, and Hannah felt fulfilled in a way that balanced beautifully with her roles as wife and mother. Jack continued working various jobs in the area, his reputation for skill and reliability growing. Ranchers sought him out for horsebreaking, neighbors asked his help with building projects, and gradually they built a life that was modest but comfortable and rich in the ways that truly mattered. Their second child, a daughter they named Helen after Hannah's mother, arrived 2 years after James. She had Hannah's dark hair and Jack's blue eyes, and both parents were completely besotted. James, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and constantly wanted to help care for her. As the years passed, the cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. Jack added 2 more rooms and a larger porch where they spent summer evenings. Hannah's school grew too, as more families moved into the area and word spread about her teaching. Eventually, the community came together to build a proper 1-room schoolhouse, and Hannah taught there 3 days a week, with Jack watching the children on those days. They faced challenges, of course. There were years when crops failed and money was tight. Jack broke his arm badly during a horse accident and could not work for months. Hannah suffered a miscarriage between Helen and their 3rd child, a loss that grieved them both deeply. But they weathered these trials together, their love deepening with each shared hardship. When Hannah was 28 and Jack 37, their 3rd child was born, another boy they named Thomas. He was a peaceful baby, content and observant, completing their family in a way that felt right and whole. The children grew up wild and free in the valley, learning to ride and fish and track animals from their father, to read and write and think critically from their mother. James showed his father's quiet competence and love of working with his hands. Helen was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could find. Thomas was the peacemaker, gentle and intuitive, with a gift for understanding both people and animals. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Hannah with a trip back to Tahlequah. They left the children with a neighboring family and made the journey together, just the 2 of them as they had not been in years. Tahlequah had grown and changed, but the seminary was still there, still educating young women. Mrs. Wadey had retired, but Mrs. Pritchard remained and greeted Hannah with tears and embraces. They visited the church where they had married, the house where they had spent their first winter together. That evening, sitting in a hotel room that felt ridiculously luxurious after years in the cabin, Jack took Hannah's hands in his. "I have been thinking about that day on the road," he said. "When those bandits attacked your stage, I was just riding back from a job, tired and thinking about nothing in particular. If I had been 5 minutes slower, if I had taken a different route, I would have missed hearing the shots. You might have died and I would never have known you existed. But you did not take a different route," Hannah said softly. "You heard the shots and you came. You saved my life, and in doing so, you gave me this life we have built together." "You saved me too," Jack insisted. "I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it. I thought solitude was enough, but I was just existing, not really living. You and the children, the life we have made, this is everything I needed and did not know I was missing." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Do you remember what you said to me on the creek path before we were married, about how we do not get guarantees about time, only choices about how to use it?" "I remember every word I have ever said to you," Jack replied. "I have thought about that often over the years," Hannah continued. "We have used our time so well, Jack. We have built something beautiful and true. We have loved each other and brought children into the world and made a difference in our community. When I think about that terrified girl on the stagecoach floor, certain she was about to die, I am so grateful she got another chance. I am grateful for every single day since then." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you, Hannah Morrison. More today than the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than today. That is my promise to you, for all the years we have left." They held each other in the lamplight, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life neither could have imagined alone. Years continued to unfold, bringing both joy and natural sorrows. Jack's hair went silver at the temples, and Hannah found laugh lines appearing around her eyes. They attended the weddings of their children. James married a rancher's daughter named Sarah and took over the ranch where Jack had once worked. Helen, brilliant and determined, went to the female seminary where her mother had taught and then became a teacher herself in Tahlequah. Thomas stayed closest to home, building his own cabin in the valley and raising horses, finding contentment in the land as his father had. Jack and Hannah became grandparents, delighting in the arrival of grandchildren who reminded them of their own children at those ages. Their cabin remained a gathering place for the extended family, especially during holidays, when it was filled with laughter and stories, and the kind of chaotic joy that comes from multiple generations under one roof. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Jack stood and raised a glass. His hair was fully silver now, his face deeply lined, but his blue eyes were still clear and bright. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, I was a lonely man who thought he had nothing left to hope for. Then I heard gunshots and rode toward them, and I found something I had not been looking for, my purpose, my partner, my home. Hannah, you have given me the richest life any man could ask for. Here is to 25 years more, God willing, and to the family we have built together. To family, everyone echoed, raising their own glasses. Hannah stood and moved to Jack's side, taking his hand. To the cowboy who rescued me, she said, her voice thick with emotion, and taught me that happy endings are possible even on the frontier, especially on the frontier. You are everything I needed too, Jack Morrison, everything and more. They kissed while their family applauded and cheered, two people still deeply in love after a quarter-century together. As the years advanced further, Jack's body began to show the accumulated wear of a lifetime of hard physical labor. His hands developed arthritis, making it harder to work with the precision he once had. Hannah's eyesight weakened, requiring spectacles for reading and close work. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute and stay active. Jack spent more time mentoring young men in the area, teaching them skills he had mastered over decades. Hannah worked with Thomas to establish a larger school that served multiple communities, training other teachers and developing curriculum. They remained vital and engaged, refusing to simply fade into passive old age. On a spring morning when Jack was 58 and Hannah 49, they took a walk together along the creek near their cabin, following a path they had walked countless times over nearly 3 decades. The wildflowers were in bloom, painting the meadow in vibrant colors, and birds sang from every tree. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked suddenly. "Giving up the seminary, the prestige of teaching there, for this life in the middle of nowhere?" Hannah stopped walking and looked at him incredulously. "Jack Morrison, after all these years, you still ask me that? I just want to be sure," Jack said, smiling but with a hint of real concern in his eyes. "I know you loved that work." "I love our life more," Hannah said firmly. "The seminary was important, but this, what we built together, this matters more. Our children, our grandchildren, the school here, our community, you and me, this is what I was meant for. I have never regretted choosing you, not for a single moment." "Good," Jack said, visibly relieved. "Because I could not have done any of it without you. You are my North Star, Hannah. You have been since that first day." They continued their walk, hands clasped, comfortable in the silence that comes from knowing someone so completely that words are not always necessary. As they aged into their 60s and then 70s, their children ensured they were well cared for. James and Sarah moved into the original cabin to be close by, and Helen visited frequently from Tahlequah. Thomas checked on them daily from his nearby home. The grandchildren, now teenagers and young adults themselves, were devoted to their grandparents, seeking their advice and simply enjoying their company. Jack remained sharp and engaged until the very end, passing peacefully in his sleep at 74 with Hannah beside him in the bed they had shared for 43 years. Hannah held his hand and told him she loved him one last time, and though grief threatened to overwhelm her, she was also grateful. They had had decades together, far more than many couples received, and every year had been a gift. She lived another 5 years after Jack's death, surrounded by family, teaching occasionally when her health permitted, telling stories about the grandfather the younger grandchildren had never known. She spoke often of that day on the frontier when a cowboy had ridden to her rescue, how that single act of courage had changed the trajectory of her entire life. "He saved me in every way a person can be saved," she told her grandchildren. "He gave me love and family and purpose. He showed me that even in the hardest circumstances, good things can bloom. Remember that. Remember that a single choice, a moment of bravery or kindness, can change everything." Hannah passed on a quiet autumn morning, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, looking out over the valley she had loved for so long. Her family found her with a peaceful expression, as though she had simply closed her eyes and drifted into sleep. They buried her beside Jack on a hillside overlooking their cabin, the mountains rising behind them and the valley spreading green and beautiful below. The entire community attended the funeral, paying tribute to a woman who had taught 3 generations of children and had been the cornerstone of her family. Years later, their great-grandchildren would visit that hillside, bringing flowers and listening to stories about the legendary love between Jack and Hannah Morrison. The stories grew and evolved with each telling, but the core remained true. A cowboy had rescued a young woman from bandits on the frontier, and in doing so, they had both found exactly what they needed in each other. Their love had been the foundation for a family that would continue for generations. their legacy written not just in the lives of their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they had helped build. The cabin remained in the family, carefully maintained and treasured. The schoolhouse Hannah had helped establish grew into a full school that still educated children more than a century later. And on the hillside where they rested, 2 simple stones bore their names and a single inscription that said everything that mattered, together always in this life and beyond. The valley continued its eternal rhythms, seasons turning from spring to summer to fall to winter and back again. The creek flowed and wildflowers bloomed and the mountains stood eternal watch. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some said you could still feel the presence of Jack and Hannah Morrison, that remarkable love that had begun with a rescue and grown into something that transcended even death itself, a testament to the truth that sometimes, against all odds, 2 souls find each other and create something beautiful that echoes through time.